I was telling her, I was like, I'm having a hard time, when I go out and asking for donations for and sponsorships for the gala. And she said, it's because you're Black. Let me go with you. It made me sad. I was like, you know what? This is sad. This is sad that a white woman had to go with me, and she had to talk and tell them about my organization for me to get any help.
He wasn't allowed to compete depending on what the attitude were of the white people. His forte was saddle bronc riding. He was one of the best, and someone cut the cinch on his saddle, and when he came out of his chute, he hit his head in the crossbar and broke his neck.
Welcome to It's Worth Mentioning, a podcast for trivia buffs about local history, pop culture, politics, and a wide variety of topics. My guest today is Delphia Bradley. She moved to Idaho Falls in December of 2023, opened a business, and then began raising funds to open an African-American cultural arts center. We've spoken with her before for stories at eastidahonews.com, and we're going to be catching up with her. And then later on in the show, we'll be talking with a man named Les Purce, who became the first Black elected official in Idaho in the 1970s. So we got a jam-packed show for you today full of Black history in Eastern Idaho. Before we get into the interview, I do want to remind you to subscribe to our podcast on the East Idaho News YouTube channel. Be sure and like us and rate us there. You can also find this podcast in audio form wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow our show and be sure and rate and review our show so that the algorithm can recognize us and get us out there so that listeners like you can recognize it. Okay, Delphia Bradley. She is currently living in Seattle, Washington. That's where she came from when she moved to Idaho Falls in December of 2023. She's joining us today via Zoom from her house in Seattle. Delphia, it's good to catch up with you again.
Nice to see you, Rett. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So tell me, first of all, let's start with, you came to Idaho Falls and lived here for a year or two, and now you're back in Seattle. What made you move back to Seattle?
I think the climate in Seattle, and in Idaho Falls began to change after the election. And I noticed it, I felt it, and it was time for me to return home to what was normal, more diversity, more inclusion, more acceptance of just me being a person in my brown skin, and just feeling back at home and being normal. So it's good to be back home.
Now, what's it like currently in Seattle? Because I know that you initially came to Idaho Falls because you were experiencing some hard things. You know, you had mentioned initially that you were experiencing racism and abuse by your former landlords who owned the building where you ran a business. And so now moving back there, have things improved?
I think so. And it was really in Shelton, Washington is where I was experiencing that racism. So I had an operating open restaurant in Shelton, Washington. That's where the racism was coming from. I had a second location in Seattle where we signed the papers and ready to move into, but we never got to open our doors because of the racism that we experienced in Shelton. It kind of was a domino effect. Both restaurants, I had to close them both at the same time because of the loss of income, things of that nature. Now I'm back in Seattle, living here in Seattle. Not doing business per se yet here in Seattle, but just kind of existing and living here. And it's been great. It's vibrant. It's full of diversity. And it's good to be back home. I love to see my mountain, not Rainier. Go hiking every now and again.
Uh-huh.
And so those things are great.
That's great. So you mentioned the climate started to change in Idaho Falls, and I assume you were talking about how you were treated here.
Absolutely.
In Eastern Idaho.
Absolutely.
Do you want to talk about that?
I just felt this, and I cannot say it was direct, it's more indirect. And I noticed it really after we had our African American gala for our African American art museum. That was in November. We had that in Idaho Falls. And I noticed as soon after that event and soon after the election that things started to shift. I started to begin noticing people staring at me going through the supermarket. I began, noticing, just racist tension that you would have to, I guess, be in my skin to realize. You wouldn't notice it if you weren't in my skin. It would probably be like, oh, it was just normal. But I noticed, the staring, the glaring, the extra questioning, of things. Just so I said, you know what, it's time for me to go.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Truly. This is a highly religious community, as you know. And so to experience any level of negativity, I'm sure sorry to hear that. Which kind of brings up a larger issue of, we've talked about this before, that racism, even if it's more subtle or it's still an issue that people of your race still experience. Aside from the stares and the things that you were experiencing, did it get any more negative than that? I guess is what I'm asking.
We talked about this before where my children were harassed, being called the N-word and things of that nature. It happened even at my child's school before. So I told you I had a senior in high school and he had experienced some racist remarks in which he had dealt with on his own. He didn't want me to get involved. He dealt with it on his own and he was well enough to do that. But beyond the remarks that we kind of just laugh at, it's comical at this point, but it does get under your skin. It does begin to bother you because you just want to coexist and be human and learn to be human together with all races, wherever we go, whether it's Idaho or Shelton, Washington, or wherever we are. We just want to coexist and all learn to be human together without all the additives of racism and all the weird stuff that just comes along with just the color of my skin and the texture of my hair, because to be honest, I can see myself in other people, no matter what race they are. And that's what connects us, right? That commonality. I can find common ground and connect on any subject or any issue or anything because I can find that common ground with somebody else. And that's what connects us all. That's what else allows us to be human and learn to be human together, right? As we all have to be law-abiding citizens, right? So, yeah. If we're here in this world and we're coexisting, things like the color of skin and texture of hair should not be an issue.
Yes. This is a conversation that many people find uncomfortable to have. Even having this conversation now, I can already hear people going, "Oh, there's this racism issue," and people tend to roll their eyes or glaze over when you start to talk about this in a community where it's a predominantly white community and people are skeptical when you raise the racism issue. What would you say to people like that who are not a minority, who have no idea what it's like in your skin?
I would say just walk with me. Walk with me and kind of sympathize and empathize with me, okay? See it from my perspective. Sometimes we have to see it through a different lens. I think that you need to listen to some stories of the struggles that African Americans and people of African descent experience on a day-to-day basis, especially in predominantly white communities. And Idaho being a predominantly white state, what is it, like 0 to 5% minority of Black people, and probably a little bit more than that of Hispanics, and probably less than that than Asians. So you have to really look at it with a different perspective. I'll say this, yes, I started business in Idaho, but when business was not picking up as fast as I wanted to, I actually applied for jobs. And my resume, they was like, okay, you're overqualified, come in for an interview. I cannot tell you how many interviews I went on. When they saw me, they immediately changed their minds. Okay. It had nothing to do with the interview. Yeah, absolutely. It had nothing to do with the interview. It had nothing to do with my skills and talents. I'm overqualified for the jobs that I was applying. I was just trying to, make money on, till the business picked up to where I wanted it to, to be. I was denied just based off of me walking in, and they seen that I was an African American woman. Denied, no matter what, it denied. And so I stopped applying. I stopped going on interviews. I just said, okay. And then things started, when I would tell people these stories, white women, these stories, I'll tell you this example. One white woman just told me, stop, don't give me that sorry excuse. Suck it up. It's, she just she didn't understand, what I was going through.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another white woman, I'll tell you this, that I was just befriending, and she befriended me. And this is during the time we were promoting the gala. And I was telling her, I was like, I'm having a hard time, when I go out and asking for donations and sponsorships for the gala. And she said, it's because you're Black. Let me go with you. Lo and behold, she went with me. Do you know how many sponsorships we got when she went with me? As opposed to when I went by myself?
How many?
I got like 4 or 5. I can't not tell you. I got so much. We had,
wow.
I got everything I needed in one day, because she took me and she said, let's go here and I'm going to talk for you. Don't worry. I'll do it. And she did. I was like, I couldn't believe it, but I could though. But then it made me sad. I was like, you know what? This is sad. This is sad that a white woman had to go with me, and she had to talk and tell them about my organization for me to get any help.
For Pete's sakes.
Yeah.
So yeah, getting into this gala, you had this last fall, initially planning to open in the building that used to be, I believe it was a cheese factory back in the day. You've been trying to raise funds for this African American Cultural Arts Center.
Yeah.
And I would assume that the reason for you wanting to do that is based upon your experience as an African American woman.
Absolutely. Not just my experience, but my experience is shared with so many others that are there. African American descent people that's already there in Idaho Falls and in the same region as Idaho Falls. My experience is not isolated, is what I'm saying. And so me having that experience, I can imagine being an African American or child of African descent living in Idaho. You're defenseless. You're adopted into a predominantly white family. You're living in a predominantly white state. All history of yours has been erased. It's not prevalent in what you see every day. You don't see yourself represented in anything. There's no signs of cultural anything to represent African Americans. So being in that situation, it becomes very isolating. It becomes like you're in a bubble and you're just trying to burst out, and you want to know more. You're searching for truth. You're looking to social media to inform you of the truth and just kind of find an outlet, right? Because what you have in front of you, it does not exist. Everything about it. And as a matter of fact, I'll tell you a story. A little girl that I heard, she told her hairdresser she was adopted into a white family from Africa, and she told her hairdresser, she said, I'm just waiting to turn white. I think somebody told her that everybody starts off as Black and they turn white. This is stories that these children, that this child in particular has been told, so I'm waiting to turn white. So what is that saying? She doesn't even embrace who she is. She doesn't know who she is, right? And so these things matter to me. So this is why I came to start the museum, to open the museum, so that children of African descent, brown babies of all shades of brown, can accept who they are, know their history, and embrace who they are and love who they are. To know thyself and to love thyself.
Yes. By the way, on that history note, I would like to remind people watching this podcast or listening that a few months ago we did an article on Black history in Eastern Idaho, and I would encourage people to go back and read that article because there's a lot of rich Black history in Eastern Idaho that a lot of people are not familiar with, and we will include a link to that article in an article below this video at eastidahonews.com. I'll put it in the show notes as well for people to refer to. But Delphia, on that history note, so you're trying to raise funds for this African American Cultural Arts Center, and you've told me that right now you kind of have a traveling art exhibit that you're taking all over the state. Do you want to tell me what this is?
Yeah, so we're focusing on different aspects of what this museum and art cultural center will be. So we were in Boise, we started there, and we did I Am Art. And we focused basically on telling history through the vehicle of art. So we are focusing on youth, and we have youth artists from all over the continent of Africa. And so we started with the exhibit of Stephen Ifiga and his art. And I also incorporated my daughter's art in there as well. She's got a collection called Beautiful, and she really focuses on colorism in her drawings and paintings. So she'll draw all colors, shades of women of African descent, and saying the whole idea of this whole collection is that we're all beautiful. And we focus on Stephen Ifiga, where he comes from Nigeria. And he talks a lot about the racism experienced here in America, and how when we come from a different country to live here in America, we can become lost and lose our heritage, right? Because we're trying to fit in with a culture that doesn't necessarily understand us, and culture is totally different from where you're raised on the motherland, and where you're coming here, very liberal, right? Very liberal, and so things can be lost, and how he's trying to keep his generation together to where you don't get lost in the transition of being an immigrant from the motherland to here to America, and for efforts of work and schooling and all those things, hold tight to your heritage. And so he focuses a lot on that, and a lot of different social issues that he's experienced. So we put all that together, and we did a series, I Am Art, in Boise. We just left Moscow, and we focused on history. So we did I Am History. And we focused a lot on using Marcus Garvey as our topic and point of topic, and as well as Stephen Ifiga's art as well, to tie it all in, to know your history, and to know where you come from and know where you're going, and understand the importance of self-awareness as you navigate the different aspects of life and do life together with everybody. And so we'll be in Idaho Falls sometime later in September, and we'll tie it all together. I Am Art, I Am History, I Am Fashion, and we'll keep on going these series because we are such a vibrant culture, people of African descent. We have so much that we contribute to the world that we just want to touch on all those artists and facets of living. So we just want to put it all together, and we'll be in Idaho Falls soon with I Am Fashion.
Where will that be held?
That is yet to be determined. We want it actually to be, I want it to be in a museum, not a museum, but in a college. So I'm not sure that we're probably looking to collaborate with some college down there, and it won't be Idaho Falls. More than likely, it'll probably be Pocatello. But I really want to collaborate, and we'll see. Working on that right now. Yeah,
very cool. So the idea eventually, so with each of these events, it's a fundraiser, right? It's ultimately raising funds for this ultimate project of having this cultural center devoted to African American history and art, right?
Well, eventually it'll raise money. Right now, I'm just putting the word out. I want to gain momentum. I want the young folks to get excited about it. When we were in Moscow, we were able to tap into the I of U students and the WSU students. And so we were able to get them excited, about history and about art and about culture and about learning who they are and about, getting the community to embrace, who they are as well. So right now it's just a movement. I think that eventually it will start to now, after such, it will start to raise money. So, yeah.
How much money do you need to make this thing happen?
Well, we started with a low budget. Now we're up to about 100 million. So we need a lot of money. At least we're looking to raise 1/4 of that. And the rest, of course, can come from, investors and things like that. But we need at least 1/4 of that. So if we can get 25,000, 25 million of that, we'll be excited to just do that. And the rest of the monies can come from investors and things like that. We have big plans.
Yes.
Huge.
Very
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. So this is a constantly evolving project then. I mean, it's going to continue to evolve and unfold in ways that you're probably not anticipating. The location is still being determined as well, correct?
The location, yeah, we were going to partner. Like as you mentioned, the cheese factory. There was a business there that was operating, but that business is now no longer going to be there. So we have to build our own, from the ground up, and so that's why the price has increased to such a large amount. So if we're going to build it, we want to make sure that, and I want to mention this too, Rett. We're building it from ground up, and that's important. That's very, very, very important. Because what we're seeing with museums right now, the government funded museums, such as the National African American History Museum in DC, that's being attacked, to be wiped away, along with all the other smaller museums that are government funded, right? If we get it ourselves, own it ourselves, it's privately owned, privately operated, nobody can take it from us. So it's important that we build it ourselves and that we own it, so that we won't be pushed out through policies of so-called DEI, which is not at all what we're under. Okay, we're well qualified, we're well earned. We're not taking handouts from anybody. What we are doing is bringing awareness. We're building the economy, and we are enlightening and encouraging people that are there in Idaho, and actually people that are not from Idaho. So the neighboring states will come and see it. So it's actually a great thing that we're doing.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we'll have to stay in touch, and as this project continues to come closer and closer to fruition, have you back on the show to talk about your progress. Yeah. I do want to, just in the last few minutes we have here, we have talked before about how a lot of the main the reason that racism still exists, a lot of it in large part has to do with lack of education, ignorance. And that's kind of the point of this, of things like this, is you're trying to educate people on African American culture and history so that we can all just relate as human beings, like you said, and not have to be divided by skin color or things like that. Anything else you want to say to the community just about inclusion and building a culture that doesn't exclude people based upon skin color, but just brings us all together as one,
Yeah. I think that it's important to note and to say that with the climate that we're in right now, all the things that we see happening in DC, things that are being pushed out from DC, the hatred, the divide, the misinformation, the flat out lies, right, about so many different topics. It seems as though our human rights are being under attack every day. I would encourage people to, especially in Idaho, to not allow that to infiltrate their way of thinking, to not allow that to govern their actions in a negative way. But I would like them to be empowered and inspired to do the opposite of what they see happening, to love on their neighbor as they would want to be loved, to include people, and think about the words that they say, their gestures that they may make, to make everybody feel wanted, seen, and heard and accepted. Because at the end of the day, we're all doing life together. We do everything together. We go shopping together. We're at the hospital together, right? We're always doing life together. We're at the movies together. We're always together. So let's not just embrace each other. Let's just embrace and love on each other and show kindness to one another.
That's great. Delphia, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. It's great to catch up with you, and I wish you the best of luck with this project.
Thank you so much, Rett. Thank you for having me.
Now, shifting gears, my next guest, Les Purce, is also a resident of Washington State. He retired as a university president about a decade ago, but he grew up in Pocatello in what was then called the Triangle neighborhood, and that's where all the minority groups lived at the time. He went on to become the first Black elected official in Idaho. He was first elected to the city council, the Pocatello City Council, in 1973, and then was later appointed mayor. He also has a unique family history. His grandparents, Tracy and Bertie Thompson, came to Pocatello in the years just before World War I, seeking employment. His grandfather went on to become a professional rodeo star who was later killed in an accident. We talk about his life and career as well as his family history in our conversation. One point that I wanted to start off with is that in the 1970s, I believe it was 1973, you can correct me on the years if I'm wrong, you became the first Black elected official in the state of Idaho.
Yeah, that'd be right. That'd be in 73. That
You were elected to the city council initially, and then you were elected mayor of Pocatello.
Yeah, and in we have a city manager form of government, and in 76, which is the bicentennial year, I was appointed by the council, elected by the council as mayor. Pocatello had at that time a city manager form of government, so we, in that kind of a format with a city manager, the mayor of the city is normally elected by the members of the council.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. So back in 73, when you ran for city council, what was your reason for wanting to run for public office and be a council member?
Well, I had been involved in, kind of public activities for, since I was young. But at that time, there were a couple of animating issues that we were concerned about. And one had to do with issues of air quality and housing, low-income housing, and healthcare. Concerns about air quality were some of the issues that were going on at that particular point in time. And a lot of the younger people had concerns about that. That was one of the issues that I ran on in terms of regulating better and understanding what potential health risks might be from those industries. We were in the major process of looking at planning and zoning, and the community was growing. We were having a number of industries that were interested in joining it and coming to the city at that point in time. So those are all issues that I ran on.
How did you get interested in politics? Like, why did you want to run?
Well, I come from a family that has always been very socially and actively engaged. My mother and father have always been community-minded people. And all of us, they raised us kids to be that way. And my father was a member of the Idaho Housing Coalition. My mother was the first chair of the State Human Rights Commission for the state of Idaho. And they both served on the Council Against Malicious Harassment that were involved in eliminating the Nazis from northern Idaho. I come from a very activist family.
What was your mother's name? Remind me.
My mother's name is Idaho Purce.
Idaho Purse. Is
Yeah,
she?
she turned 99 on Saturday. I was just at home in Pocatello celebrating her birthday. Yeah.
Oh, for Pete's sakes. Wow.
Yep.
She's still kicking.
Yep. As my grandmother used to say, it was just exactly what she used to say. I'm still kicking. Yep.
Still
She's
kicking.
very much still kicking and very active, and we're blessed to have her with us.
So your upbringing in Pocatello, did you grow up in what was then called the Triangle neighborhood?
Well, the Triangle neighborhood is the neighborhood that had all the people of color at that point in time. So yeah, I grew up in the Triangle neighborhood, just how most African Americans did, and most Greek people and Italian people and Native Americans and Hispanic people. We all lived in the same neighborhood together. The neighborhood where my family home still is. The Greek Orthodox Church is a half a block away, and the Catholic Church is a half a block away the other direction. And a block and a half away is the Bethel Baptist Church, and what was once the Corinth Baptist Church, and the African American AME Methodist Church, all in that same area within probably 2.5 blocks of my house.
But I'm curious about what life was like at that time, growing up in a time when people of color and the whites were segregated. Here,
Well,
right here in Eastern Idaho.
well, you're talking about segregation. You're talking about the lines that blocked housing,
Yeah,
but the schools weren't segregated. And we went to schools that were integrated. That was not a issue in the north where we were there.
sure.
But during the war, my father told stories, of course, about some of uh, the restaurants that would not serve African American and Indian military people when they were there. My father came in World War II to Pocatello in the Air Army Corps. That's how he met my mother. He was shipped out with a cadre of other African American soldiers in 1941. And
Yeah.
they were sent out. The air base was established to protect the naval ordnance plant that was in the railroad yards at that time. And it was while he was here, he was an MP. He met my mother, and they got married, and he decided he was going to stay out west, which is how John Purce ended up living for until he died at age 90 there in Pocatello as well.
Gotcha.
But at the time that they came out, there were individual stores that carried a lot of the same kinds of principles that existed in the South for some of the restaurants and hotels in the 40s and the early 50s. So there were remnants of those kinds of things, particularly in housing and accommodations, not in the school systems, of course, because there really weren't that many minority people in a system to establish a kind of segregated system that existed in the Deep South.
Hmm. Was as far as just the environment though, growing up in that neighborhood, um, like, because you mentioned in school, the schools were totally integrated. You just
Yeah.
there was a dividing line in where people lived. Was your community treated in a positive way, or was it negative, or I mean,
Well,
what was your experience?
it all depends. I mean, I had a very positive childhood and growing up with my friends and in school, and in athletics. There were not any kind of color lines in the North at that point in time. The tensions at that point had to do where people could live, but there were people that worked together. But there were remnants of segregation and bias at that point in time. But there also were remnants of that occasionally would happen in the school system, depending on the teacher that you met, and the kind of educational experience that some kids might get because of the color of their skin. Not just black people, but we had large numbers of Hispanic people and Asian people as well that went together. But we were very close because we were all raised together, went to school together, and played together, and all went to Bonneville High School, great athletic place for programs and a rich cultural education kind of experience ourselves as kids. So we were interacting with the kids that we grew up with. So, but in terms of being able to go to most restaurants, most people that were working class people didn't go to the restaurant, didn't have the money to go to restaurants. So my experience didn't involve as a young person going out to eat at any time. My folks just didn't have that kind of money when I was growing up, and they were young and trying to make it. Like a lot of families, uh, working class families, white and black, and other groups.
Mm-hmm.
So my childhood in Pocatello was a lot of fun. We went to Ross Park. We rode our bikes. We had church socials um, and played baseball, little league, pony league. City had a great athletic program for kids. They had recreational facilities in the parks. So that was the kind of experience I had. I have a very strong family, man.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
folks are my grandmother, my mother's mother was a school teacher, well, who went to one of the first historically black colleges in Jefferson City, Missouri, Lincoln University, and Lincoln College at that point was one of the historically black colleges. And she was a normal school teacher. But when she came out west, examples of discrimination, she wasn't allowed to teach when she came out west Idaho. But she tutored all of her kids. She was a school teacher. So I had aunts and uncles that came out and grew up well read and with very sound educations. One of my uncles was the first black person hired in the civil service program in San Francisco. He was the first bus driver of color in the San Francisco public service system, transit system, years ago.
What was his name?
His name was Lester. I mean, sorry, Alfred Thompson.
Alfred Thompson.
Yep.
So yeah, speaking of your family members and your family history, it was your grandfather, Tracy Thompson, who came to Pocatello just after World War One, I believe. And
No, they came in 1909.
was it 1909?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. What brought them to Pocatello?
The railroad and uh, work. And he was a cowboy. He was a Western guy. They first stayed in Colorado, and then they were first in Colorado, and then a year later moved on to Pocatello. The railroad yards were a place where the thing that attracted so many of the various people of color that came here were the railroads. It was a place where a person without a formal education could make a livable wage because the railroad was so labor intensive,
Mm-hmm.
either working on the tracks or working in the yards or being a chair car attendant on the passenger trains, but a variety of labor intensive jobs within the yards of the railroad. And because of that, a lot of ethnic people, the Italians and the Greeks, all came for the same reason, because there was work and a livable wage and a way to raise a family. That's why Pocatello had such a diverse number of religious institutions. It reflected all the varieties of people that came here.
Yeah, gotcha.
There
Okay.
was also a Jewish synagogue in Pocatello at that time.
So where did your grandparents, Tracy, and what was his wife's name?
My grandmother's name is Bertie Thompson.
That's right, Bertie.
She lived to be 102 years old. She's
Wow.
my grandmother. She was born in the Muskogee Indian Reservation in Oklahoma, in Muskogee, Oklahoma. Her mother was Creek Indian. Her father was an African American guy.
Oh, interesting.
And my mother was raised in Jefferson City. My grandmother was raised in Jefferson City, Missouri. She was adopted by a family there in Jefferson City and raised by them, and then went on to go to normal school as a school teacher. And it was there that she met my grandfather when he was coming through Jefferson City, Missouri, with a herd of military horses that he had broken when he was a very young man. So he came to Jefferson City and they met in church, is what I understand.
Okay. So then they moved to Pocatello to
Well,
get.
they didn't move to Pocatello originally. They moved west and they lived in Denver for a while,
Mhm.
for a year or so. And one of my uncles was born. And then the next stop was not Pocatello. It was Aramo, Idaho, which is down on Marsh Creek, which is between McCammon and Malad, actually McCammon and Downey, Idaho. They had a ranch. And my grandfather, he rode with the Shoban Indians. They're great horsemen and rodeo people. And my grandmother, being Creek, half Creek, also was close with the Native people. And they were their closest friends when they were there. And it was the Native women, my grandmother always told me, that convinced my grandfather that they needed to move into Pocatello because they were out on Marsh Creek, about 25 miles away from Pocatello, and she was out there on the ranch with the kids when he was out rodeoing and traveling. So they eventually moved to Pocatello in the mid-20s, early 20s.
I see.
Yeah.
But your grandfather, as he was on the rodeo circuit, my understanding is that he eventually was killed in some kind of
He
accident.
was killed in Missoula, Montana. Someone cut his cinch on his saddle.
Was
He
it?
rode in a variety of rodeos. Sometimes he wasn't allowed to compete depending on what the attitude were of the white people. And he did a variety of things, rode as a rodeo clown sometimes, but his forte was saddle bronc by uh, riding. He was one of the best. And someone cut the cinch on his saddle, and when he came out of his chute, he hit his head in the crossbar and broke his neck.
They did it because of racial hostility?
Well, I don't know what the details were about that, but there was a lot of animosity sometimes. And he rode. He is very good at what he did.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. What year did he die?
1930.
1930. How old was he?
He was 45.
45. And so you come from this background, and then you're born and raised in Pocatello,
Yes.
eventually become a city councilman and later mayor of Pocatello.
Yeah.
I'm curious though, kind of circling back to this point, like I mentioned earlier, you became the first black elected official in Idaho. Did that hold any significance to you? Did you give any thought to that at the time, or were
I
you?
didn't. I didn't know that that was the case. I mean, someone noted that at the time, which in itself makes a statement that it was 73 when that occurred. But significance, it's. I guess it's historical. Uh,
Mhm.
but I didn't know that when I was running or after it happened or otherwise, really.
Did you face any backlash when you ran for city council initially? Was there any person who didn't want you to run just because of your race, because of your skin color? Did
Well,
you deal with
well,
that
this
at
is
all?
1973, and if they didn't want me to run because of my race, they didn't tell me. But uh, there were 3 council seats open, and I won the most votes out of every of all the candidates who were running for all the positions of all the seats. So, my mother and I, when I campaigned in the city, when I ran for office, I'd go to doors and knock and introduce myself, and someone would say, "Are you related to John Purce?" And I'd say, "Yeah, he's my dad." "Oh, John and I work on the railroad together. He's a extraordinary guy." He says, "Well, if you're John's boy, you have my vote." "Oh, are you related? Are you related to Idaho?" "Well, she's my mom." "Oh, Idaho and I went to high school together," and blah 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 blah.
Oh, that's
After
great.
campaigning for about three weeks in the city, I said to one of my campaign manager, "It's my mother and father that are going to get me elected, not me." I said, if I have to keep going to doors and having people that know both of them one way or the other. So no, it was my mother and father are extremely well known and highly respected in Pocatello and in state work. The city just named a park after our family, honoring my mother and father when I was home for the 4th of July last month. So my folks have really, they're recognized as some of the outstanding leaders historically in the state of Idaho.
Fascinating conversation with Les Purce. Thoroughly enjoyed my time with him. We will post the full unedited interview in the article below this video at eastidahonews.com. We'll put the link to that in the show notes for those of you listening to the show in audio format. Appreciate all of our guests and their time today. And also remember to check out our previous article about Black history in Eastern Idaho. We'll put the link to that in the show notes as well. For It's Worth Mentioning, I'm Rett Nelson. We'll see you next time.